Oh my god, it's hot in here.
Well, yeah, dude, you're just eating fucking soup. Oh,
Why is it set to 77? Marty.
what did Marty do, bro?
He set the AC to 77
How did he do that?
with his little paws.
He's just
He be opening doors and shit. All right, let's run it from the top.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a cinematic odyssey through the 100 greatest films spanning from the roaring 1920s to the cutting-edge masterpieces of 2024. Carefully curated from the lovely people on Letterboxd. Two intrepid souls embark on a journey through a treasure trove of timeless classics and groundbreaking contemporary works, where each frame embodies the enduring magic of the silver screen. Grab your popcorn and join us on this epic expedition through a century of cinematic excellence, where every film promises to enchant, inspire, and leave an indelible mark on the soul. And now, for your listening pleasure, here are the LetterBros.
welcome everybody to the newest episode of LetterBros, Welcome everybody to the newest episode of LetterBros, where we let a wheel decide our fate and which movie we will watch next. As always, you are joined by myself, Felix. I'm joined by my buddy Parker. How are we doing today?
I'm doing hungry today, Felix. I can't lie to you, but I'm doing good. Got a little bowl of ramen noodles here, and I'm ready to discuss this marathon of a movie. We still have 2 more to go on this list, so
correct. But we will not be watching those immediately after. We'll let the wheel decide when we're going to watch that next. For those of you that joined us on our last episode, we polled The Human Condition 2, but because there's a lot of trilogies in this list, we decided that if we polled a sequel or the threequel of the trilogy, that we would be watching the first movie. So we pulled The Human Condition 2, but we watched The Human Condition 1, titled No Greater Love, directed by Masaki Kobayashi. It's the first installment of a sweeping trilogy that follows the moral journey of Kaji, a pacifist and idealistic Japanese man during World War II. In this film, Kaji takes a job as a labor supervisor in a Japanese-occupied Manchurian mine to avoid military conscription. He hopes to improve working conditions for the Chinese laborers. He quickly finds himself trapped in a moral dilemma as his efforts are crushed by the cruelty of the Japanese military and the brutal conditions imposed on the workers. So, right off the bat, this sounds like a great fucking time. This is it definitely dives into those ideals very heavily. This is a dialogue heavy movie, if Parker would agree with me.
It is very dialogue heavy, and there's a lot of characters too. So you are following multiple storylines that lay within the overarching theme of the film for the entire runtime, and I'm sure that will continue to be the case in the next 2 films. But it is very dialogue heavy, and it's also very, very clearly meant to be a message about humanism. And I'm sure that we're going to continue to see that, because this film is very clearly the first in a series of movies. It ends, and of course, as always, we're getting into spoiler warnings. If you'd like, follow along with the conversation. If you don't want to watch the movie, just to get an idea, but will be spoiled for you. At the end of this first movie, Kaji-san is drafted to war to go fight for the Japanese, which essentially the reason he took this job in the first place was to be exempt. So now the Japanese managers, so to speak, have kind of turned on him because he ended up being such an issue for them throughout the course of the first film. But I know that we're going to continue to grapple with the themes of humanity. And it really came across in the dialogue. I felt at times I was watching kind of like a Japanese soap drama or soap opera.
Yeah, that's the word.
At times. But yeah, it did feel a little melodramatic at times. And we'll get into that when we discuss our ratings. But yes, as we were saying,
before we started recording, we pretty much dived into it that as much of a reputation that this film has, and I'm hoping that the other two in the trilogy will kind of build upon that, because we do visit these characters again. I thought this was going to be more like an anthology for each film, where it's like we kind of delve into other situations regarding humanism, but we do follow the character of Kaji and his wife. Sorry,
I
I
also
forgot.
thought that. I thought it was going to be an anthology as well.
We follow Kaji and Michiko through all three films. So we will be seeing these characters again, and I think, you know, the ending certainly opened up a lot more, because I guess one of the gripes I had with the film, that like, while yes, it does dive into these like very heavy themes, and I mean, you see that explored and expressed through all the characters in the movie. This was probably the first time we had a 3-hour movie that I felt like I was watching it. It felt like almost a 6-hour long movie, in my
Yeah,
opinion. It
I
it
agree.
it was a absolute slog of a film. Like, there's a lot of talking, and because it's a movie from the 50s, it kind of already has like a sort of quiet tone to it. Like, there's not much else going on in the background, to where you're just listening to two guys talk, kind of like a podcast almost. Like, you're just kind of
Yeah,
having
who
it.
would want that?
Yeah, who wants to listen to two guys talk? But at least we like do funny burps and other shit to keep it entertaining. But this is a
Yes,
lot of just like,
that's real entertainment. There is burps
it
and fart
is.
noises.
Exactly. But again, just there's not a lot going on in this movie. And I don't know, like, I didn't really get to have like an emotional attachment to these characters besides Cal. I really liked, like, Cal was probably like the best character in this movie.
Why would you say that?
Just because he actually had like like a story. He really cared for like what was going on. Like, he's
Well,
just
tell
wanting
us
to.
who he is in the movie.
Yes,
Well,
so Cal is one of the Chinese laborers that we see in the film. He's not the leader of them, but like, out of the ones that we do see, he has, I would say, like the most character and the most emotion. Like, he's always running on just high emotion and high energy. He's always angry, which I'm like, I get it. You're in a very shitty situation in this like Chinese labor camp, but he's always wanting to do what's right with like his people. Like, he has his own little like story arc of Chunlan, who is one of the brothel workers who they fall in love and are promised that like they're going to get married at some time, which that does not work out, as we'll discuss later. But him and Okishima, who kind of serves as this mentor to Kaji, were like two of the best characters in the movie.
mhm.
I thought so. And Kaji, like, he has his moments, but we don't get those moments from Kaji until, I think, the last 30 minutes of the movie, where we really get to see all of these themes that we've been building up throughout the movie actually play out and give us something interesting to not only listen to, but to look at. But I want to know what you have to say.
Sure. So I did like that story arc that you're referring to, a love story between a prisoner essentially and a prostitute who is used to, in this movie to essentially satisfy the Japanese workers, as well as at one point used even as means of uplifting the prisoner's spirits. They send 30 of the prostitutes into their prison. And there's 600 prisoners.
I was like, literally, I just have on my notes 30 women, 600 men.
Dude, I have the exact same note. I literally have that exact same note. I'm like, that's a recipe for disaster. And I have to say, there are many instances in this movie where I'm like, they are so fucking outnumbered right now. Like, I'm not comprehending. There's a lack of yet, and we'll get into it too.
To the math, that's 20 women, 20 men per woman.
There are several escape attempts in this movie to the point where I found it to be incredibly redundant. However, there are also many instances in which the prisoners are at a much more of an advantage and they choose not to try and escape. And it didn't click. It seemed very convenient at times. But I did like the storyline between Chun Lan and what was his name? The prisoner? Cal. Thank you. And I do agree. It was probably my one of my favorite parts of the movie, using that term relatively loosely. I also really liked Michiko's character at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I feel like there was some that was left to be desired on her end, which is a shame because it's such a long runtime and we do spend so much time with so many other characters. And Michiko never really felt like she had a whole lot of development. She's just always head over heels for Kanji, following him wherever he will go. And she plays it. The actress that portrays Michiko does an excellent job. I think one of the strongest performances in the movie, despite the fact that she's not given much of an arc to work with. You really
Yeah.
feel her love for Kanji and the way that she really wants to follow him in his journey of humanism because she loves him. If he wanted to go down any other path, she would be right there by her side or by his side. And she was so convincing in that role. So I think
Yeah.
that was probably one of the main highlights of the movie for me as well was Michiko's performance.
And I mean,
What is something?
she does follow him like to an extent. I mean, like like you said, throughout the whole movie, she just wants to be with Kaji and feel with Kaji because she knows that he's put into a very like difficult predicament. Like at a point that she's like, I want to hold your strengths, but also your weaknesses. I want
Mhm.
to be there for you and support you. But there is one part where, she kind of, and I could see why, but she kind of almost betrays Kaji when like they're laying in bed and he just wakes up to try and like get the laborers out of jail towards the end of the movie, where she's literally like holding him and saying, I will follow you and I will scream for help if you do so. Like kind of like I get, because she doesn't want him to die. Obviously, like if he tried to do that, he would get executed, but to a point that like she almost falls into that point of view of like, your life is worth more than the the seven Chinese laborers jailed up um, for
Right.
trying to escape, which that part was also confusing because they kept like stating like try and investigate, like do an investigation of like what happened. We didn't try to escape, but like we watched it and they literally said that like we have to escape in the like not in the labor camp, but in the work field. And they
Yes.
run off. Like, how is that not
So
you trying to escape?
let's discuss that as essentially the third act of the first film. So there are up until this point, I believe there have been 2 escape attempts from the prisoners from their actual housing area. Yep.
Yeah.
We are seeing them in the mine, essentially on the mountain by the mine, and they're mining for ore that Japan needs for wartime.
Correct.
And they're essentially relaxing. The prisoners are kind of slacking off and also, yes, discussing that this type of environment would be better for them to escape. They aren't attempting an escape at that given moment. However, when the Japanese guards come to break up their relaxation circle, essentially, and get them back to work, they start running as opposed to staying and getting beaten by their whip. The Japanese officials then take them running away from the beating as an attempted escape, although they never made any genuine attempt to escape the premise at that point.
Yeah.
So,
like you're saying, like, go ahead.
And then as we get on, and I want to get your take on how it kind of wraps up and we start to see the really bad side of human nature, in which these prisoners, there is an investigation, so to speak, which is very brief and obviously finds that they're trying to escape and they're sent to execution. And now we have a lineup of, I think it's 7 prisoners, and three of them, including, why does his name keep escaping me? Cal, yeah, are executed. So he does not get to marry Chunlong, who he's waiting till after the war to marry. He was always very anti-Japanese. There's obviously very strong racist lines on both sides of the Chinese and the Japanese portrayed throughout this movie. They clearly have a disdain for one another. And this is before the People's Republic of China. This is taking place before the People's Republic of China as well. And is obviously the world at large is experiencing strenuous circumstances. But what did you think of the choice to go in that direction and actually have the officers follow through with 3 executions and then essentially call it off when the prisoners start to have a problem with it?
So I'm thinking that they called it off at Kaji's wishes because I guess there was some unspoken not unspoken deal, but I mean, like, after Kao dies, like, Kaji pretty much steps up and says, "Execute me, like, please stop this, like, they didn't do anything wrong." And
Mhm.
then we see that like that mini uprising of the Chinese laborers all chanting murder, murder, murder as they're coming closer, like, to the, like, not firing squad because he's using a katana to cut people's
Yeah.
heads off, but
Mhm.
kind of saying that, like, all right, like, we'll stop the executions at the expense of taking in Kaji as this sort of traitor to Japan. And then they go into, arresting him, torturing him for, you know, trying to have him kind of admit to crimes that he never really committed. Like, he even says, he's like, "I'm not a thief. I haven't done anything wrong. Like, why am I being held against my will?"
Mhm.
Like there's a lot of, and I mean, again, like he balances this line of like wanting to do right. He wants to do his job correctly so he doesn't get sent into military service, but he also sees with his own eyes like this oppression of the laborers in Manchuria, and he wants to do right from them too. Like it's talked about through the whole movie. He wants to jump on the train of humanism, and he wants to utilize that to try and better the lives of the laborers. And I mean, it sort of works, but at the expense of his own safety and freedom.
Yeah, and the well-being of his wife as well. He did also kind of sacrifice her happiness in a sense.
Hmm.
So I think that it's good. The movie about the human condition is good that it makes you ask these questions. What is the opportunity cost of standing up for what is objectively the right thing to do? And Kaji is essentially a martyr for this
Hmm.
aspiration to have everybody, even in this time of war, treated equally, even if they are laborers, even if they are prisoners of war. And he's willing to make those sacrifices. But as an audience member, it makes you question what would your outlook be in that situation? Because it's really not just himself. He's not a single man. He has a wife, and I think
Hmm.
that that adds a layer of complexity to his decision making in a positive way.
Yeah, and I believe so. I mean, he's just trying to do right and trying to keep. He's a type of person that just wants everybody to be happy and wants to, do right by everybody at no matter the cost. Like there's even a point where, he one of the supervisors in the camp murders one of the laborers, and he has to go and speak to his boss about what they're going to do about that. Like he wants this guy either fired or just like taken off of the project entirely, but they want to cover it up as an accidental death, that like he fell off a cliff. And I mean, you see him get visibly upset and stating that like, no, I will not lie, I will not, conform to this type of behavior. But we also see Okishima, again, who I said kind of serves as a mentor to Kaji, say that like, you are going to do this because it's at the cost of your life. Like you need to adhere to what's going on. Like obviously you want to try and implement your behaviors, but right now you have to play safe and you have to play nice with these people.
Yeah, there's a quote earlier in the movie. Um, and why is it escaping me who said this? Give me one moment.
No, do your
But
thing.
there's a character that says that essentially says men can be as powerful as they want to be. They need only find their source of unhappiness.
并不是那样子，人是可以不幸的渐渐起来的，只要找出自己不幸的原因。
So if you take that quote and you apply it to all of the characters in the film, I think it makes it more fun to watch in a sense because you are trying to find that each character's source of unhappiness and following
Mhm.
along in what they're trying to do to mitigate that. And it works in some cases better than others. I think it works really well for Cal. His character again is it sucks that he died because I think
Yeah,
he really
he's a
was one of my
tragic character for sure.
he's one of my more favorite characters, and I would have loved to see his story come full circle to him accepting the fact that just because someone is Japanese does not mean that they hate him. So to
Mhm.
have that full circle moment, but rather instead we get the movie ending with his prostitute girlfriend absolutely despising Kaji, throwing mud at him is how
Yeah.
the story ends essentially.
Who I kind
And
of see
so
as a parallel to Michiko almost, that, like, she is also, like, obsessed
Yes.
with her partner. But I mean, her is like almost the opposite, like the exact, like literally the extreme, because she always talks about like, if you try to escape, or if you try to escape without me, like I'm just going to kill myself. I'm going to touch these electric fences, which there's a couple scenes regarding the electric fence that we'll go
Yeah,
over that where
this film chose to show violence and not show violence in the oddest whatever.
which, going back to like the escape attempts, that like two of them we just hear about and that we
Right.
see the results of, like that we'll see like the blanket over the barbed wire, but then there's one conducted with Chen, who's one of like, his character was a little confusing to me to figure out, like, one, where did this guy come from, and two, like,
Yes,
he's
yeah.
not part of the special laborers, but I guess he's part of like, no, he's part of Kaji's like office team.
But he's
And
Chinese.
correct, he is Chinese. And he does develop like a strong relationship with Sister Jin, who is the head of the brothel. And he has been tasked to turn off, like to go to the powerhouse and turn off the electricity so that to allow the Chinese laborers to escape. And there's one night where he is conflicted with what he wants to do, because he wants to save the Chinese laborers, but he also develops like a pretty strong friendship with Kaji, even though Kaji slaps the absolute piss out of him for doing it the first time. Which that was one of the parts of the movie where I was like, oh shit, something's going on. So I had to rewind it and look at it again. But there's one, I was like, you just see him just go. I've never seen someone get slapped so hard in a movie. But so cut to him going to the labor camp. It's dead at night, and we see two. I think one is one of the supervisors that killed that laborer, pretty much having all of those people set to kill the people who are trying to escape that night. But as the laborers are trying to escape, Chen admits that he did not turn the power off, which results in the death of all these laborers. And you see it. Oh boy, do you see it. You see all of these people.
Yeah.
For the 50s, you got to work with what
right.
you have. But I mean, it was very jarring to see that they grab the fence. You see all these people pretty much like get executed, and Chan runs towards them because, I mean, at this point, he's dead, because there's also this kind of like underline, like some of these people are working with trying to get the laborers to escape. Like that part was really confusing to me. But I mean, at this point, Chen is dead either way. So he runs into the electric fence, and you just kind of see a frame for like 2 seconds of him getting electrocuted and dying. But
yeah,
it's just,
I mean, it's definitely not incredibly graphic in my opinion.
I would think so for a movie like from the 50s. Like that's the thing. Not a lot happens in this movie.
I mean, we're talking
59. Yeah,
we're talking 59.
Yeah, so like almost the 60s. But it's, again, like it goes to the point of like there's nothing going on in the movie that when something does, it's shocking, because at this point, like you're used to the dialogue heavy tone of the movie.
Yeah, I would counter that point. I would disagree that there's nothing going on in the movie. I would rather say that there are a lot of things going on in the movie, but they are going on again and again and again and again and again, to the point where it becomes honestly a bit repetitive,
redundant,
and, to be honest, frankly, a little bit boring. I do not have a problem watching a long movie. Like, you can put a 4-hour movie in front of me, and that's great. Like, obviously, we've sat down and we're willing to take on some epics.
Yeah, Parker was ready to go and watch the 5-hour cut of Fanny and Alexander the other day.
Exactly. However, I do want to enjoy it the entire time, and I want that runtime to be justified. And I can respect the craft and know that it's very difficult to make a movie of this proportion, especially in that era. I just don't think that it was justified. I think the movie could have been much, much, much shorter.
Yeah.
And served a more poignant point. I think that it could have been more concise in the message that it's trying to tell, and would have been more effective in telling its story if it didn't try and hammer it in so deeply and so aggressively and so many times with the same given circumstances.
Yeah,
I mean, I agree. It was tough to watch, and there were times where I would rewind and try and really fully understand what's happening here, because it's also not very easy to follow, despite its relatively simple story arc.
Yeah,
In terms of what is happening. Uh,
because it's
for
trying to
me, I
build
just had
so much.
I had difficulty really following who the characters were when they're
Yeah.
referenced and not on screen. I have to admit, I was having a little bit of a difficulty really putting all of the character pieces together. And typically that's something that on a rewatch you would go back and it would start to click together a bit, but I don't feel like I missed out on a whole lot by not knowing in that exact moment who they were referencing. I still got the
Mhm.
general idea, and it came back and they said it so many times over and over that I eventually got it.
Yeah.
But I don't think
Yeah.
I'll be rewatching the movie.
Oh,
We'll
no,
get
me
into that in a
neither.
moment.
It was like, to your point, it was definitely confusing to, like, figure out, like, who we're following, and, like, I mean, there's a lot of people, like, just wearing same
I
uniforms all the time, and
dare I say that a separation was a exemplified the human condition better than this film did.
I feel like because it just hits, like, not
Real
that it
life,
hits close
right?
to home, that, like,
Is
it's
it
a little bit more
it's more contemporary, maybe?
contemporary, and just, like, it was in 2011, so it's something
Yeah,
that, like, we can kind of
this is
relate to
fair.
more.
This is
Like,
fair.
World War II feels like such a long time ago that, like, I'm still trying to, like, find the connection that I can make to this
Sure,
movie to kind of, like,
sure.
because, I mean, at this point, it's 59. World War II happened at that point about, or ended about almost 20 years ago at that point, so it's still pretty, like, because it's a 60, it ended in, like, 43?
I believe
Yeah,
it World War II ended in 45 or 48.
45. So, still closer. So, almost literally, like, less than 20 years ago,
Yeah.
so it's still
It's
fresh in
been
a lot of
15 years, almost 15 years.
exact thank you for doing the math. I appreciate you. But yeah, it's still fresh in a lot of people's minds when these movies released. Like, and
Not
especially for
yeah.
'cause it's
Not
like,
as fresh as Kurosawa wanted it to be, and sorry to interrupt, but this movie
no, you're good.
was trying to get this movie made and out, for a long time before its actual release, and he actually threatened to leave the studio if they wouldn't allow him to make these movies. So I
Mhm.
think it came out a little bit later than Kurosawa would have liked. It is Kurosawa, right? I'm not tripping out here.
It's not Kurosawa.
Okay, thank you. Um,
Kobayashi.
Kobayashi, excuse me. Kobayashi wanted to get this out prior to when it did come out, and Kobayashi did threaten to leave the studio. Apologies there. Point still
No,
stands, but it wasn't as fresh in people's brains as the
as he wanted
artist
it to be.
behind it wanted it to be. So it's even less so now in 2024. Absolutely.
Correct.
So that's a very valid
Um,
point.
which, fun fact, with their apparently Japan holds, like, a festival almost like every year that just shows a marathon of all three human conditions.
Really.
Um, and it's apparently sold out almost every time. So, I mean, there's obviously still a love for this movie, and I feel like it resonates obviously a lot more with, like, Japanese audiences.
I think it probably resonates far better now than it did when it came out. Even I don't think that there was much praise for this when it first came out. I think there was
Mhm,
actually a bit of anger at the way that the Japanese military and government was portrayed
mhm.
in that time. And I may be wrong, but off the cursory research that I did, that did seem to be the case.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
obviously, I mean, Japan has experienced such an evolution. The whole world has, but Japan and Japanese culture, obviously, since World War II, have done a 180 in terms of their geopolitical relations and their perspective on that period of time. That doesn't surprise me. That's pretty cool. And I think that
no,
the
but I
message, it's a shame. The message is there. That it's telling a great message and it's sending a great ideal. I just wish that it was more fun.
no, and I completely agree with you. Like,
And not even
we have
fun. It can be
explored
depressing. Like engage me more.
no, but I mean, we have delved into much not much stronger themes, but I mean, like, we dealt with a separation, like you said, which, I mean, to our point, it was a very difficult movie to talk about, but at least, like, we still thoroughly enjoyed watching it. Like, it still gave us something engaging to, because at the end of the day, it's a movie. Like, it's something that needs to, like, clutch you in. Like, this feels like it is adapting a 6-part novel. Like
It felt like a chore. I felt like I was watching it to talk about it with you, if I'm being honest. Like, yeah.
exactly. And we
And
never
that's a
want it to
shame.
feel like that. Like
It's such a masterful a piece of art, and I don't want to disparage it in any way. And honestly, I could say the same thing about The Meg or any movie that is unanimously considered
The
as
Meg.
bad. Like, just the craft of creating a movie, we have to understand is like objectively we appreciate that.
correct. It is
So,
very difficult to make a movie.
but past that point, yes, exactly what you're saying. And interesting. I think that we haven't really had a movie where we are so completely opposite on our takes and opinions yet.
No, we've been pretty straightforward with like how we feel. Like I feel like we have a pretty similar taste in movies. So I don't find it surprising that like because I mean we were both talking to each other while we're watching the movie. I mean it took me pretty much 5 days to watch this movie.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, it took me, I guess, two and a half. I didn't have much left when I watched the ending of it today.
mhm. And there was also
And I
like
don't like to do that. If I can sit down and watch the whole movie all the way through, then that's what I would prefer.
no, and because you want to be engaged and like give your full attention at that moment in time, but
In this case, though, I don't think. I think I had a better experience breaking it up because I was more engaged starting each session off than I would have been at that point in time if I had been watching it for an hour and a half already
yeah,
prior.
because
Like,
this movie is also broken in parts because
it is.
the movie is the whole trilogy is based off of a 6-part novel that when it released did very well. It was a best-selling novel, but the studios like as despite the popularity like of the movie, nobody wanted to make this movie.
Mhm.
It could be just because of the runtime and because of how long it is that it just it was a very difficult project to take on. It almost like, and sorry to keep bringing it up, but not a lot of people wanted to make Dune because of just like the themes of it and just that it would be such a grand undertaking. The author of The Human Condition, by the way, Junpei Gomikawa.
Is there
But
anything online of his interpretation of the films of what the author's reaction is?
of his reaction to the films.
I'd be curious to hear. I knew it was based off a 6-part novel series.
And it's broken up like that too. Like
It
it's
is, yeah. So
broken up like
there's
part one, part
essentially
two.
like a little more than halfway through the part one of the trilogy. It says end of part one. I was like, no, it's not. I still have like an hour and a half left.
Which made that very difficult to watch it, to be like, okay, but like, am I actually getting the movie that like we're supposed to be watching? Because I'm like, this is part one and part two, but I'm like, but it's only 3.5 hours. I'm like, I thought that's what the first movie was, but
Mhm.
I don't really see anything about like his reaction towards the interpretation. But I mean, I'm guessing it must have been positive because this movie, again, like you said, has left such a positive impact on a lot of people, and that's fine. Like, all props to this movie for continuing to like we're still talking about this movie in 2024. It's obviously still has its audience, like it's still among the top 20 on Letterboxd for like top narrative film, but it's not our cup of tea, and that's okay.
So before we move into our rankings, I'm curious to hear what your favorite takeaway from part one of the human condition is.
I like to what we've been talking about. Like there is clearly a very strong message behind it, which I can respect, and I truly appreciate the message behind it. It's just, you know, the working conditions and having people held in camps, obviously not okay. And Kaji is just trying to do right through everybody at the expense of almost his own life. So that's something that I can respect. Something I also really appreciated and I thought was kind of funny was all these fight sequences in the movie where it's just people pretend slapping each other, and then we get to the execution where like we're finally like, oh my god, this guy has a katana. We're gonna see
It's
some
so
crazy
bad.
shit. Like there's even a shot where he stabs Cow, and it's clearly one of those like put it under the armpit. And when he kicks him into the pit, Cow still
Yeah.
has his head on him. But
Yeah.
then he says, like, oh, don't think of it as a human head. I'm like, that boy still got his head on his shoulders. But
Yeah.
I'm like,
That I
it's all
mean the execution, no pun intended, of that scene and of that choreography was not very good.
Like, there's even a point where, like, oh my God,
It was almost comical. It felt like I was watching.
It was very comical.
Like,
there's
it's
Okishima.
definitely not meant to be. It's not
No,
meant to
it's
be.
definitely not. But there's a point where Okishima is in like the like regular laborers like camp, and he's like dragging this dude around the entire camp, and I just like couldn't help but laugh because it's just so silly. It's like this one take shot of us just following Okishima drag this dude around. He like throws a basket up in the air, like I'm like, how am I can't
Yeah.
take this seriously. But
Right.
what are your final takeaways?
Ask for the favorite and we end up disparaging it. Yeah, so again, overall it's not one of my favorite movies for sure, and we've discussed that. I think my favorite pieces of this film are definitely the theme, what it's going for. Like I mentioned,
So, whoa, you were looking at I have the cast pulled up right here. Who are you looking for?
but yeah, I think the actress that played Michiko was definitely a highlight. And there's another quote. I think that there's a lot of really good like pieces of dialogue in this movie, not in accordance to how much overall dialogue there is in this movie. I find the ratio to be a bit pushed towards the end of frivolous, but there are some really good pieces. I mentioned earlier the quote about, someone need only find their source of unhappiness to become the most powerful person. There's also a line of dialogue which explains Kanji's action when he slaps Chen, which I thought in that moment, I'm like, wow, that's very out of character for him because he's such a pacifist. And I still in general feel that way. However, he has a conversation with Michiko, his wife, about it later, and she says, you didn't slap him because you were angry with him or because he did anything wrong. You only slapped him because you lost face in front of others.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciated that perspective. And there's a couple of times where similar things happen in that film, where a conversation between two characters will allow you to gain insight on why certain characters made the decisions that they did. So I think that the movie is written eloquently and throughout much of its runtime. And I think that's my favorite takeaway. Because I do want to find the positives. I always do want to find what I like. So I think that really stands out to me is some of that dialogue. Even though we had kind of stated it's too much, there were definitely some highlights in there.
Yeah, and with that,
you want to move into yeah.
I was like, if you'd let me fucking finish. No, so I think that's a great segue into going into our ratings, which I will state that like I just finished my ratings like before.
Yeah, you and I both just finished this film.
Yeah, so
today.
It'll be quite fresh in our minds now. So with that, I will start with giving enjoyability and rewatchability. I went and gave that a 9 out of 15. Again, there were obviously some moments that I did enjoy while watching the movie, but not enough to make me enjoy the movie as a whole. And this will not be something that I'm going to go back and rewatch.
Yes, I won't be visiting part 1 of The Human Condition again, most likely. At least not anytime in the near future. I am intrigued by the next 2 Human Condition films. This is seen as like a war epic. So I know that we're going to dive into some even harder material to grapple with here in the next 2 movies. So I do have hope for part 1. Now that I understand the build up to the first 2, I'm not probably going to be touching it again. I can't lie. I didn't really enjoy watching it. It felt like I was watching it as an assignment almost, unfortunately.
Me too. I felt like I was watching this for class.
I'm going to go ahead and give it a 6. I was thinking of 7 to be just right under halfway of 15, but I did knock it down another notch just because this is a very subjective category, and this is just not a movie that I had a vibe with. I didn't really feel as though I connected to it while I was watching it.
So what do you think of the story?
Now, the story is objectively, it's a great piece of work. You're handling a lot of very sensitive themes. You're dealing with the human condition, which by its very nature is an extremely fragile and complex theory. We don't even know exactly what the human condition, there's no exact definition for it.
No.
So I think that it did a good job of creating stories that make us question the human condition. And for that reason, I give it an 11. I think that it did a really good job telling the story. And I'll knock it for some story aspects a little bit later. I don't think that my boredom or my frustration was a result of the story whatsoever. So hard to knock it really there. I think it was good.
No, and I agree with you because I also gave it an 11 for that fact. Because again, there is a story to be told in this, and the what we get in the movie and what he is trying to portray in this. Because I mean, it's very difficult to try and adapt a novel of this size into a visual medium. But again, a lot of the themes, a lot of what he went to work with, it's there. Like you can definitely see it. It's just not presented in a way that makes it enjoyable to watch. But I will give it that the story itself was praiseworthy. Like I thought it was really great. But with lasting impression, that's where it does take a dive for me because again, lasting impression for us, it's something that like, is this movie going to be sticking with us? Like what kind of impression has this made on me as someone who regularly watches film would leave. But for me, this gives me a 7 out of 15. There's not, again, those themes that he presents are wonderful, but it's not in a way that really stuck with me as a viewer.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I even said it earlier that there are films that we have already watched for this show that have made me question the human condition more than this movie did. So for me personally, I don't see myself carrying the topics with me and really chewing on the happenings of this movie as I continue on in my life. So I don't have that personal lasting impression, or I'm not anticipating myself to. However, like you said, culturally speaking and on a world scale, this has very clearly made a lasting impression. I think this is a movie and a series, obviously, that people refer back to when they want a display of basic, raw equality and goodness for other humans, despite your differences. Like you said, they will rewatch the trilogy in Japan yearly. You said,
I think it was yearly,
which is crazy. I give it a 10. And I could go a little bit lower and I could go a little bit higher because if I'm wanting to be truly objective and just allow my score to represent the cultural lasting impression that it has. So I'm trying to strike that balance,
Yeah.
I could go a point lower. I think I feel comfortable at a 10 right now, which actually puts us at even scores through
Oh my God.
through 3
For
categories.
now. But what did you think of it, the visuals and the music?
So I didn't think that this movie was anything special in that regard. Am I crazy? Am I going to be killed
No.
for saying that?
No, I don't. Again, a lot of this movie is dialogue heavy, and it's a lot of shots of just people in a room or people in a brothel just talking about their feelings.
I didn't go to school for filmmaking. I've been involved in the film industry, but all I know is essentially what looks and sounds good to me. So there are many instances in which I can appreciate the difficulty of a shot, even if it doesn't work for me. So take like Tenet, for example. Did you ever see Tenet?
Yeah.
That cinematography was freaking excellent. It was done very well. But for me though, it wasn't necessarily like my personal style. Here, however, I didn't see anything or hear anything that was that appealing to me. And there were no real instances in which I could objectively appreciate the difficulty of a shot. And maybe it's because I'm just not knowledgeable enough. But fuck it. If I'm not knowledgeable enough to, appreciate certain things, then that's the only score I can give it, is based off my appreciation and my knowledge.
And that's all you can do, my guy.
I'm going to give it a 5. And I was going to give it a 4. But it doesn't look horrible.
No.
Right? It doesn't look horrible. There's definitely like some audio clipping going on. When camera angles would change at certain points throughout the movie, you would hear room tone switch on and off, which was frustrating for me. And there were also some fade outs in which the picture didn't look spectacular. And to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the contrast. There's a lot of contrast in this movie. Obviously, it's a black and white film, but it's very dark by nature, and it allows its characters and important aspects to stand out by being lighter. And it
No.
didn't really work for me. I didn't think that there was anything where I was over the course of 3.5 hours, mind you, there was
No.
not once a shot where I was taken aback. And the score was, it sounded not spectacular to me. It
There
didn't
was
stand
a
out.
score, but it wasn't very present for the
Yes.
most part of
And
the
when
movie.
it was, it didn't stand out. It sounded like an old movie score. Literally,
Yeah.
like it could have been taken out of anything, unfortunately.
So I will say there are some I have 2 shots. Well, there's a couple of them. Like a lot of the wide shots that we get of all the laborers like walking in line, where you kind of get like, especially in the beginning of the movie, where we get the sense of scale that, oh yeah, this looks like there's 600 like Chinese laborers like walking to camp. Like there's a lot, like there's one that I have in the thumbnail where it's like a diagonal shot uphill with the silhouette of the laborers walking up. I thought that shot was really cool. But again, it's just it's me trying to find something redeeming about this film. There's also some instances, because this movie is in 2 languages throughout. Like it's in Japanese and Chinese. And during the Chinese dialogue, they have the subtitles on the right side of the screen vertically. But then in a lot of the shots that are outside, it's a white background with white subtitles. So then that makes me start to think, how did people watch this movie and try to read through the subtitles if they can't see the subtitles?
I didn't even notice that. I saw that there were the Japanese subtitles on there when they
Like
were
a lot of
Chinese.
because a lot of Cal's scenes are at the labor camp outside, and I mean he's speaking Chinese throughout the movie, but you can't understand what he's saying if you are a Japanese audience member listening to this man speak Chinese, and it's just
that's interesting. I didn't even notice.
I feel
that.
like that part would have been very frustrating as a moviegoer going into that. Fun fact: all of the Chinese labor workers were played by Japanese actors.
Really?
Saying all of their lines phonetically, so like they just like, this is how you would say it, like, but they don't really know what they're talking about. But I mean, that's also from IMDb fun fact, so I take that with a grain of salt. But going into that again, with like, obviously there is a score here, but it's not anything memorable to my end. So because of that wide shot alone, and there's also one shot where Kaji, right before the execution, is walking on a bridge, and it's kind of like the camera is looking up towards him. I thought that shot was really cool. But other than that, it's a 6. That's where I feel comfortable leaving it at. Going into pacing, where this movie faltered on heavily. This 3.5 hour long runtime definitely feels like 3.5 hours. And I feel like, again, the pacing doesn't really pick up until the very end of the movie, where we already get all of these themes kind of bubbling up and exploding into the last 2 escape attempts, or the execution scene, or Kaji's tortures. Like, that is where I finally was locked into this movie, but it was 3 hours into it. So I'd say the pacing of this movie is where it does falter, where I give it a 6 out of 10.
I agree. I think that there was a lot that could have been left out, and I don't think that the movie would have suffered, in my opinion. We get a lot of time with a lot of different characters, which is typically fine. However, again, and maybe this is more of an issue with the story, I don't know, we end up repeating the same circumstances, essentially, with very similar parameters. And it kind of happens a couple of times, and we have the same conversations over and over, and it became very redundant. I give it a 5 in terms of pacing. I was thoroughly bored at times. And
like, how many times can you have an escape attempt and say, I'll let this one slide? And then another escape attempt happens. He says, I'll let this one slide. Like,
yeah, it reminded me of the show Prison Break, which I had the same issue with, where literally they're just breaking out of prison for the entire show. Like, that's every arc is essentially a breakout.
It's the same.
And I stopped watching. So if it changed after 2 seasons or whatever, sorry.
Now they're breaking back into prison.
Right. But yeah, I think a 5 is unfortunate, but
it's fair.
The acting I thought was really good throughout most of the film. I always have an issue. I say it every episode. I always have an issue assigning a score for acting, just because I'm not a perfect actor. And I'm sure that I would not get a 10 or, scores along those lines.
Not with that fucking attitude, bro.
Yeah. You know what? Fuck it. I'm an 11 out of 10. I give it an 8. I give it an 8 because I think that there were some really strong performances across the board. And there were definitely some taxing scenes in there where you could tell that it felt like the cast was feeling genuine emotion at certain points in the movie.
Shout out to Michiko.
However, and this may be the way that it was directed as well. A lot of scenes also came off as very melodramatic, and they came off as a bit of a soap opera in which there wasn't enough subtlety, in my opinion, in the performance. So that's why I knock it down from a 9. I think that was really good across the board. Just too over the top at times. Definitely too over the top at times.
And I agree with you there. I also gave it an 8 out of 10. Again, a lot of these performances, like towards the end is when the performances become more prominent and there is a range of emotions, because a lot of the times, again, it's just people talking. It's a lot of just, you're kind of showing the same emotion. Like Kaji fell flat throughout the entire movie until the end, whereas like Michiko was putting on a performance in every scene she was in. Like she was like her character was portrayed very well by Michio Aratama. That is the name of Michiko's actor. She does very well, and she has definitely upped the score for me. There's a lot
I
of the
agree.
other characters.
Oh, absolutely.
Suspension of disbelief. It's pretty difficult because, again, to your point, like there's just a lot of prison breaks where there's not really any sort of action taken until the very end of the movie. And a lot of these fight scenes just took me out of it almost immediately. So I went and gave it a 6 out of 10 for suspension of disbelief. Like the moments that it does try to keep you engaged and try to lead you into those emotions that the characters are feeling, they work at certain points, but a lot of the times I don't get a connection with these characters.
Yeah, the fight scenes absolutely, and the execution scene absolutely took me out of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There was it didn't feel as though there was real choreography that was happening.
That's literally what I was thinking. Like there was no sense of choreography. A lot of times like people are just slapping each other and you can visibly just see them miss because they're acting.
While I feel that the plot is stronger in terms I don't feel that there's any super gaping plot holes that bounced right to the front of my mind. There were still some circumstances in which I felt were a little bit more on the convenient side, such as, the prisoners escaping back at home and then not coming to the conclusion that they should escape while on the job until later. And I understand it. I won't knock it too much. I'm also going to give it a 6, almost exclusively for the fight scenes, if I'm being honest. Whereas opposed to High and Low, I also gave it a 6, and that was because I had a genuine issue with the decision making. I felt as though it didn't match what the character had done up to that point, and it wasn't justified. So as opposed to there being a plot issue with my suspension of disbelief, this time it was right there in front of you watching it unfold and it telling you straight up, you are watching a movie. You are not watching real events unfold. You are watching a movie in which people are pretending to strike each other. It didn't have the same oomph.
No, it didn't. But I get what you're saying. Like a lot of
this movie really needed that oomph. It really needed those physical scenes to hit hard and be difficult to watch because we are supposed to be empathizing with these characters. We are supposed to be going through these horrific events with them and coming to these realizations that at the end of the day, we are all people. We are all people, okay? Despite any other things that categorize us, at the end of the day, we are humans. And the fact that we didn't see that tough to watch human on human brutality definitely took me out of it. And this movie absolutely would have benefited from those fight scenes really hitting their mark. And it completely whiffed, in my opinion.
It was definitely a lot easier to watch than I thought it was going to be.
What do you mean by that? It was a lot easier to watch than you thought it would be.
So because you read into these themes and you're thinking that it's gonna be a difficult watch, being in those scenes. But again, a lot of the times it
didn't have the same emotional impact, right?
Correct. That's what I'm trying to go for.
So originality is tough. I wish that you were going first for this one. So
I can, if you want me to.
Yeah, I have a number in mind. I want to hear what you have to say.
So I would say just based off of what this movie is going to be with the other two films down the line, I can appreciate what it's going for and the grand scope of it. I'm hoping that this number gets a little bit higher as we get the other two movies in context, but I gave it an 8 out of 10. I just think that with the other two movies down the pipeline, I think this is what it's going to be going for. So I want to leave it up there, and that score might change just based off our feelings of the other two films, but I want to give it that for now.
Yeah,
An 8
8.
out of 10.
I'm going to give it a 7. I'm going to stick with the number that I had in my mind. This is the reason I'd like to give it a higher than a 7, and I'll give you the reason I'd like to give it lower than a 7. I'd like to give it higher than a 7 because, as you said, no one wanted to make this movie, and a topic such as this and an expansive series of books such as this take genuine creativity to adapt to the screen. Like, that is an original work. You have to create something original, even if there's already source material. So there's no point deduction for that. Especially on this scale, like you said, with there being 3 very long movies. However, I also feel as though it did not take the themes of humanitarianism and of moral righteousness and give us something that was incredibly unique. And I understand that this movie came out in 59, so it was a predecessor of many films that we see today that tackle similar issues. I just don't think that it strayed far away from the story arc of humanitarianism at large. You have relatively simple circumstances in which a pacifist is sent to a labor camp to alleviate the stresses of the internment workers. And he encounters the managers who, of course, as he expected, are brutes and don't want his humanitarianism. And they appreciate the fact that they can beat up on the slaves just as much as what the slaves provide for them in terms of the ore. It's a relatively simple setup in order to get us to the next point, which we'll dive into in part 2. That, and it also definitely felt like a setup movie, which is fine. This is very clearly part of a larger story. So in terms of personal attachment, I'm struggling between a 1 and a 2 here, but I'm going to get it up to 60. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 2.
Okay.
It doesn't break that barrier where I'm going to be thinking about it enough for it to be a 3, and it definitely doesn't reach the levels of 4 and 5, which, you know, is something that I really like internalize and will carry with me and enjoyed throughout.
No, it's something you want to push for a movie that you genuinely want to give a little bit of a higher score
Right,
to. We've
right.
discussed it earlier that like this is your last attempt to kind of push it.
And that's exactly what I'm doing, because I obviously have incredible respect for what was accomplished here. And I don't want to disparage it in any way, at least not more than we already have.
No,
But
and
I think that it absolutely deserves to at least have a 2 here. I want to give it that extra point out of respect.
no, and I feel you because I also gave it a 2 to push
Okay.
it to 63. So, and again, I can respect what the movie is going to do. I hope that we get stronger feelings for it as the trilogy goes on.
Mhm.
But at this very moment, there's not much else that I can defend about the movie.
Yeah, not much that
Um,
ties me to it, to be honest.
But with that, it does, so that puts it at a 61.5, which does make this the lowest movie that we have seen. And not in terms of like this is the worst movie we've ever seen. Obviously, there are things about this movie that obviously make it what it is. Like there's obviously an audience that truly loves this movie. I just don't see ourselves as part of that
Mhm.
audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think that's fair. I would say I enjoyed this the least of the movies we watched so far.
I mean, it shows just that like we're pretty aligned with what we feel about these films,
Yeah.
and I mean,
I'm waiting for that one to come along where we are just so opposite.
Oh
It's
yeah,
bound to happen.
but now it's the best part. It's the part we all are waiting for.
If it's part 2, dude,
I'll throw my computer if it's part 2.
we'll just have to edit it.
Yeah, we'll just spin that shit again.
Just kidding. We don't do that.
No,
I
we don't.
promise.
We're not. We're gonna stick with the choices that we made. But Parker, are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready. Been waiting all day for
Let's-
this.
Let's hit it. Go, where are we going? Oh God, what are we doing?
Dude, it was stuck on human condition there for a second. I don't know.
I was so worried. I'm like, no. All right.
So we have, at the time of the creation of this list, we have the number 79 film, Scenes from a Marriage from 1973. Have you heard about this movie before?
I feel like I have. I have to pull it up here to see.
So it's actually
Well, first
directed
I
by
have to spell
Ingmar
marriage.
Bergman. So it's directed by the same person who
Oh
made
my, that's why I've heard it. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So we have another movie from the same director as Fanny and Alexander. So I'm
Oh,
very excited
good Lord.
to dive in. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and read the Letterboxd synopsis that we have up here.
Go for it.
All right, so Johann and Marianne are married and seem to have it all. Their happiness, however, is a facade for a troubled relationship, which becomes even rockier when Johann admits that he's having an affair. Before long, the spouses separate and move towards finalizing their divorce, but they make attempts at reconciling. Even as they pursue even as they pursue other relationships, Johann and Marianne realize that they have a significant bond, but also many issues that hinder that connection. Let's go.
Sounds like
I,
an Ingmar Bergman movie.
Yeah, so what I'm most excited to see here is if he strays into the weirdness that we saw in Fanny and Alexander, which that movie got weird at some points. There were definitely some
It did.
scenes where you're like, whoa, like this is awesome. I don't really know what I'm watching right now, but it allows you to interpret it in whichever way you'd like. And I really like that about Fanny and Alexander. So I am excited to watch it. We have another great, from the sounds of it, foreign language film that we're going to dive into. So, yeah, what are your thoughts?
I think we're in for another movie where Parker is going to instantly love it because it's Ingmar Bergman for sure.
That's not true. That's not true because I love The Apartment. I love Billy Wilder's The Apartment. It's one of the funniest movies I've seen. It was something that I can't wait to watch again for the sake of LetterBros. I did not really like Sunset Boulevard. I just
know
really
you
didn't
didn't.
like it. So I'm not tied to the director by any means. So
no, but we're gonna try and just wrap things up because I'm almost late for a dinner reservation.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you this time about the human condition.
Hey, it's me. Sorry, we had to kind of rush the episode a little bit. I was running late for a dinner that I had for my birthday. Just to give like a proper outro, you can always find the LetterBros podcast on wherever you get them, Apple, Spotify. You can also go ahead and find me on Letterboxd at ETZIO911. You can find Parker at Parker_Paget on Letterboxd as well. Make sure to follow the LetterBros Instagram account. Follow us on YouTube for the video version of this episode. I've also created a TikTok for LetterBros, so we'll have some of the uploaded reels and maybe shorts from the YouTube channel, but also some original content down the line. We'll see where that's going to go. But until then, thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you at the movies.